Boys and girls, before we get started, we got something we have to tell you about because we're all at home. We're all trying to find stuff to watch, and there is a fantastic streaming service that you might not know about, but you need to know about, especially if you're a genuine love of cinema. And I know you are here with our being a listener in the seats with. It's about the service called Film Movement Plus. It's a fantastic streaming service that has a really diverse and eclectic selection of films all across the world, from documentaries to foreign cinema to some old classics to some modern ones and a little bit of everything else in between. And if you take a look there this month, they've recently added some great stuff like Shake the Dust, which is a documentary from a few years back, which takes a look at the cultural impact of hip hop and breakdancing in various cultures all across the world, and it's a wonderful film, and I can't recommend it enough. And there's other stuff like Karl Marx City, which dives into sort of the history of the German Democratic Republic, and sort of it allows the filmmaker to sort of trace her past and sort of give us facts, but in a very sort of artistic and fictionalized way. But there's stuff like Pretty to Durango from filmmaker Alex de la Iglesias, which just got added as well. Which is a wild film with Rosie Perez and Javier Bardem from back in the day. But it's one of those things where there's just all this stuff that you really do need to check out. And you know what? It's a scant $5.99 a month, and I mean, no one's really going to Starbucks anymore, so it's basically the price of a coffee. And because you are a loyal listener to us here at In the Seats With, not only if you sign up at Film Movement Plus, which is at filmmovementplus.com, you get a free month, but if you use our special promo code, which is SEATS, you get an extra 3 months at half off. That is a steal for all sorts of fantastic cinema. If you want to do that, please go visit them over at filmmovementplus.com, and remember to sign up with the promo code SEATS to get the special deal, and enjoy getting lost in a world of truly fantastic cinema, which we enjoy every day, and we hope you do too.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
The only thing that's more important than telling a truly important story is when you actually succeed at doing it. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm assuming that you do, because you're listening to us right now, you can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Spotify, Google, basically wherever your podcasts are found. It's all good. And you can find every single one of our episodes archived at our YouTube channel. And if you could subscribe to there too, that'd be really great. Also, you can find us on social media. You can follow us on the Facebook, the Twitter, and the Instagram, as the kids are calling it, at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, I say it a lot, but I mean it, please visit us over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest movie news, reviews, a little bit of television, basically anything about the moving image, because that's what we love to write about and to talk about. And we love it when you read about it, so please come on by. This is a good one, and it's an important one. It's on VOD platforms now, and it's a striking documentary called Bastard's Road, and it's one of those stories that I think people need to hear, because it's about combat veterans and sort of dealing with post-traumatic stress and all of those issues that sadly come up for our men and women who serve. And it's the story of a U.S. Marine combat veteran, John Hancock, and sort of a healing journey that he takes on foot across the states. And he walked over 5,800 miles, ultimately confronting the demons that had sort of consumed his life. And he visits his fellow Marines along the way and families of the fallen. And we get a real sort of look at sort of the insight of what it means to serve, and sort of the humor and the compassion that these men and women have for each other, and the bond that will never be broken inside a veteran community which is dealing with such high suicide rates, and a population of the general public like us who don't quite understand the traumas that they've been through. And I think Bastards Road really does a fantastic job of trying to bridge that gap in many ways. And we had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with not only the director producer Brian Morrison, but we talked to the soundtrack team from by the of Daniel Strauch and Michael Marx Gibbons of the Aliceanna collective, who really gave the film a very unique and sort of evocative score, which really hammers home just sort of the emotion of the film and sort of what we see going on. Bastards Road is really, I think, vital viewing for anyone in Canada and in North America, just to really get a sense of understanding and maybe even compassion for the men and women who have so bravely put their lives on the line for us in the name of freedom and everything else in between. And we need to give them that respect, and we really need to help them sort of bridge the gap back to civilian life whenever possible. And I think this film will really open a lot of eyes and allow for some understanding, just to see how human these people really are, and just how we need them in our lives. And it's an important thing. And watching John's sort of journey really was a fascinating watch, and it really opened my eyes just in terms of the need for more support systems out there. And I mean, I hope you get that too when you watch this film. But first, listen to our talk with the team behind Bastards Road, and I hope you enjoy it, because I know I did, and I think this is a really important film.
Thanks so much for having us. Looking forward to it.
Now, I mean, congratulations on the movie. I mean, walk me through, I guess, sort of finding about his story, because I mean, I was just so struck by the power of, I don't know, like just walking.
Yeah.
Like just being able to sort of go on this journey. Like, walk me through sort of discovering the story and deciding to make a movie about it.
So John and I went to the same high school. We shared a lot of mutual friends, and he started popping up on my Facebook feed through like newspaper articles and local TV stories as he was walking from Maryland down to Florida. And I just was instantly struck by that walking by this guy who was just walking weeks, months on end, seemingly with no end destination. And I just kind of like felt kindred to him in a way that, we were about the same age. I didn't really have any direct connection to the military, and just felt like, if that was me, like, what is that world like? And come to realize, my next door neighbor is his closest friend growing up. He puts us in contact, and John and I, start talking. And I've been doing video production for about 10 years in Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. And we kind of just started talking more and more about like, maybe I come out and film some trips. And that was kind of the beginning.
Was it a hard sell? Because I mean, he's very natural in front of the camera. Like, he's a good subject for a documentary. You couldn't have hoped for a better subject.
Yeah. Agreed. And, I think what was interesting from John's point of view is like a big part of his journey was starting to talk about the things that he was struggling with, being open and talking out, those memories that had been tormenting him for so long. And so, with all those little interviews, those 2-3 minute things that he was doing, where like he probably was with the news crew for an hour or 2 hours. Like, I was out there with him for days. And, it was definitely a process to learn, about that world, and to meet a lot of his Marine brothers and their families. I mean, it was incredible.
Was Is there anything you learned along the way? Because I mean, it's one of those, like, it's dealing with some hard topics, and you're getting some very interesting insight. But I mean, I can also see at the same time that there may be a little bit of pushback of maybe not necessarily wanting to talk about it. Or was everyone sort of fairly open to the idea of what you were trying to do?
Yeah, he was very forthcoming with everybody else that he was connected to in his walk, the people he was visiting, that like, hey, there's this camera guy that's following me now, and he's with us, like I made it a point of like, I'm not, I'm almost like an observer. I wanted to be a fly in the wall, on the wall, like just kind of being there and hopefully trying to be as invisible as possible. And then in strategic moments where I would pull out like a cinematic camera and get some shots of John on the road or with their guys, like once I'd been there for a little while, I could kind of pick my moments to make maybe a moment a little bit more cinematic in a way. But it was a learning process through and through. And Mike, was one of those people that I would have conversations with, being from the military, about like what that world is like, and learning about just that world, and telling a story that is true and genuine, and not something that's like manufactured or has some preconceived idea of what it should be, and just let the story be what it is. And so getting Dan and Mike involved on the music side just felt kind of like a natural fit. That it was later in the game, as the film had developed, but it was again like learning about that world, and just trying to not really like target it in like it's this story about PTSD. It's a lot of things. I mean, it was almost like when I first started, it's like, okay, this is guy who's struggling with his traumatic memories from war. It's about PTSD. And then it just became further and further away from that, which I felt was the uplifting side, the traits of strength, of loyalty, of love between this military world that I find really exceptional and inspiration.
Well, I mean, I mean, obviously that's a beautiful thing, but I mean, I'm amazed that sort of just, this almost seems like a bit of a family affair in terms of making this film. And I'm curious because, especially in documentary filmmaking, it's either you've got a story, you've got an arc, and you do your research and you put it together, or it's grab the camera, go shoot, figure it out later. I'm kind of curious, not just from your perspective, Brian, but guys, for you, like, how do you sort of compose music for a movie that Brian may not have figured out what it is yet? If you know, like, you know what I mean? Because I can imagine this thing was evolving over time, and he was putting you to work, and you may not necessarily have the right ideas for the right moment.
Well, it's funny that you say that. I think timing is everything in this situation. We were lucky enough to have an intimate knowledge of the film and Brian and John's journey, really throughout the course of it being created. But we didn't jump in on the music side of things, and until the film was, almost at its culminating point of being created, because Brian basically came to us and said, "Hey, like, this is what I'm looking for. This is what we don't currently have. Can you build it?" And because we had that intimate knowledge of what was happening, because of Mike's relationship to the military, and honestly, I was lucky enough to be surrounded with some really talented artists. We were like, dude, let's build this. We feel it. And being parts of hundreds or thousands of music sessions in my life, it was really hard to even explain how organic it was. It was like everything just happened. Mm-hmm. And I remember going through the sessions with Mike, and then handing them off to Brian, and him being like, whoa, like, okay. Like, and it's not that Brian didn't expect that from us. It was moreover, like, I think the connectivity and emotion of it was, you could feel it. It was palpable. And I think that's powerful. So yeah, that's why, and that's why I say timing. Like, everything kind of came to fruition at the right time for all of us in terms of our careers and our journeys for this movie. And I think we were lucky enough to be a part of it, and hopefully made some good music.
Right.
So.
And it's funny you mentioned family affair. That Brian, Dan, and myself go way back. And as the film kind of was progressing, Brian was in talks with me. I was an 18-year Army vet. So, I really appreciated Brian's efforts to get the full story behind everything. But in terms of the music creation, it was, it was like three peas in a pod. Brian would come into our studio, have sessions, be like, guys, this is working, this isn't working. And just because we had known Brian for almost a decade at that point, it was pretty seamless and just,
Right.
Understanding almost what he was already looking for, which made our job pretty easy.
Right.
Yep.
And we could also be really honest with each other, which was powerful, right? Because if something was like, hey man, like this shit isn't, or pardon my French, but this is not working, or that's not the direction, the conversation was a lot easier than having to figure out how to tell somebody that.
Right.
And so I think that allowed for the expediency of it without losing the creativeness of what the pieces were. So, yeah.
No, I mean, I love hearing that. And I mean, just in watching the film, it made me so cognizant of the fact that, and I mean, I don't ever want to say, ex-army or ex-military. I know it's the old joke. There's no such thing as an ex-marine kind of thing. But when I watched the film, I was so struck by just the realities of that people can be trained to go to war, but they're never trained to leave war. And I think the film really does sort of capture that. And how important was it for all of you to sort of try to capture that? I mean, energy, I guess is probably the right word, because it's not necessarily positive, negative, but it's there. It's sort of in the room, and everyone's dealing with it as he's walking down the road, literally.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because and there's a lot of, I feel like those things that we can all think on after watching this film, and it's kind of deconstructing this idea that veterans come home, they have they see combat, they have PTSD, they're like victims, or and I think it's deconstructing that in so many ways, and understanding the different complexities of like what it means to be in the military, whether you see combat or not, and how great of a transition that is, of like your whole day is basically scheduled, and then you add on combat, you have these extreme situations that come into the fold. It's another round. And then you have, things like moral injuries, loss of friends. So, you're dealing with grief, you're dealing with unfamiliarity, you're dealing with all these things. And not all of them are these PTSD, right? I mean, and it would be nice to have the attention to the exit as it is to the preparation of going to war, like to your initial point of like, we spend all this time training the guys and all this money and all these foundational elements that lead to our military being the strongest fighting force. There should be probably more attention given to the exit and to, okay, come back to the civilian world, and and I think that probably should circulate into the mental health field, into transitioning employment opportunities, I mean, everything. And considering, the stakes and the scale that our military operates in, it's like, man, we really do need to focus some resources a little bit differently.
It's like the be all you can be slogan for when you join the Army, but then after you leave, it should be all you can still be. It's like they forgot to they heavily marketed on the front end, but didn't market it all on the back end. So,
well, I think to everybody's point here, what Bachelor's Road really does well is it starts a conversation. The military, what is it? It's really a microcosm of society. So basically what people in the military deal with, people in society deal with. Coming home from war, having done it myself, is an incredible transition to make. Losing a job, losing a parent, losing a loved one, things you go through, when you're going through just everyday life. Those are all things that you have to deal with. And what our society doesn't like to talk about is issues surrounding mental health. And the military being a microcosm of that. A great example is if you start talking about having mental health issues in the military. Now, this isn't current because this is starting to become a better conversation to have within the ranks there. But you could lose your security clearance, you could lose your job, that kind of thing. Same thing with society. If you're having some sort of issue and you talk about it at work, you may lose that job. So what Bachelor's Road does very, very well is it I don't want to say it starts the conversation, but it follows that conversation a little bit further down the rabbit hole and pushes it a little bit further. And I think if we can get mental health more into the limelight, if you will, and more into being accepted as just like if you get sick, you go to the doctor. That's where we need to be. And that's where the military needs to be.
No, and I think something the film really did quite well, like not only from a creative standpoint, but from like a mood standpoint as well, just to forward the idea that so many people sort of on the outside looking in don't necessarily understand. Because I mean, I've been fortunate enough to talk to a few people who've served, and the main issue that always seems to come up is, at least from a psychological standpoint, that they're still coming to grips with is like, why did I get to come home and the guy next to me didn't? That feel, and I really got that feeling through this film that we're at least starting to push that a little bit further up the ladder to make that a little bit more clear for people to understand. It's not the violence, it's not the trauma. Obviously, some of that is, but it's the guilt of being there. If does that make any sense? Does at least, because I mean, at least I have never served. I could not speak to that experience, but that's the kind of thing that I'm getting from this film.
Yeah, I mean, it's understanding the complexities of those issues, that if you're in those type of environments and you have those type of close-knit relationships with people as you are fighting next to guys that understand, I'm going to do everything I can to protect you, and you're going to do everything you can to protect me. It's like in those type of environments, I mean, those type of extremes, I mean, it's really hard to relate to back home. I mean, we can all kind of relate to the love and trust and commitment and all these values, but like you go in those type of war situations, combat situations, I mean, it's an extreme set, like it's everything is dialed up, and then you have to come home, and there are those issues of survivor's guilt and remorse, that like, what did I do? And this guy was the best of us, and he didn't come home, and here I am, and I'm screwing up my life. Why do I deserve this? It's an unfortunate trap that some of those guys get into, and feeling that like they're either like the weakest link, or that they didn't deserve to come home when so many other guys that didn't, were the guys that they wish they could have traded places with. And so I think John does a great way of explaining those type of thought processes, so that maybe, some of these guys, some of family members of people that come back can hear these sentiments from John and some of his brothers, and kind of get a context into, hey, maybe that's what they are feeling. Maybe it and it's not just one thing. It could be any number of these kind of issues that John and his brothers bring up in the film.
Yeah. Well, even to piggyback on that, Brian, I think as a civilian watching this film, and really what I took away from it, and what I saw a lot of the audience who were civilians at the film festivals take away, was really the communication between those who were and those who weren't, right? And I think that was almost invaluable, because there were multiple parts of the film where soldiers talked about the questions they would be asked by civilians that were so far off scale of how the conversation should take place. But nobody really understands that until you have these conversations in the flesh, until a movie like Bastard Road brings to light, like, hey, this is what it feels like. So I feel like it helps transition civilian and non-civilian life a lot better for somebody like me to understand how to broach the subject.
Agreed. Yeah.
Without destroying it before it starts.
Yeah, having more effective conversations than somebody coming up and saying, like, hey, how many people did you kill?
Because these guys isolate when they come home, right? They all disperse and they go to their parts of the world. And when the only people they can talk to is their inner network, even if those are the only ones they'll ever truly be able to relate to, they can't have any real conversations with anybody else, because nobody else knows how to talk about it properly. And that's a huge part of why I think the divide is so large, because there is nobody knows how to communicate who wasn't there. So I really learned a lot from that, you know, just in terms of like, holy shit, this should really, not that I would ever say how many people did you kill,
Right.
but that conversation happens a lot, you know. So anyways.
No, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it really does feel like such a bridge, and it's the kind of film that, I mean, there's a lot of artistry into what you guys have done, but it's telling such a human and such a real story. And I'm kind of curious, just to try to lighten the tone a little bit. Because correct me if I'm wrong, this is your first feature, and this is the first time you guys have done a film score, correct?
Yeah, it's my first film.
Technically correct. Yeah.
That's the first time we've done music for this type of film. Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah. I mean,
Our
it was
first rodeo. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So there was a lot of firsts happening here. I'm glad we could have that with you, Brian.
Well, I'm curious for all of you, just based on your respective professions, because like, is there a moment that sort of got you into this, to like, for you, Brian, to want to be a storyteller, and for you guys, because especially in the last maybe 10-15 years, there's so much interesting stuff going on with scoring music, because in the past people would picture John Williams in a room full of musicians as they make a big score for a film, but that's not necessarily the case, and it hasn't been for quite some time.
Right.
Yeah, so I think for it was interesting. So we did some of the original music on the film. A close friend of ours and also part of this network, Jeremy Griffith, did the actual score on it. So we did some of the original song accompaniments.
Okay.
But that being said, we still play in that field.
Right. And to kind of speak to what you're talking about, you don't require a big orchestra anymore. In fact, there's plenty of plugins and softwares and synthesizers that do the same thing. And a lot of the score work to this film was just synthesizer based. So, and Jeremy did such a great job with kind of accenting the emotion of the piece with just simple tones done on a regular old synth. I don't want to say regular because he'd probably kill me for that.
Right.
But yeah, on just a very specialized synth.
Fix it in post, don't worry.
Yeah, right. But the to create scores these days, because Dan and I do this, a lot now, thanks to Brian's project, we've kind of really launched our own path. But a lot of it is just done on a keyboard, utilizing really specialized software that any kid on a laptop with some creativity, in their bones could do. And that's what's amazing about where music is today.
Mike says that, but he also cringes when he says it because he loves analog gear, and anything that you can have, that's actually tangible is powerful. But to his point, man, like if you hear it creatively, you can create it a lot quicker than you used to be able to in the past, and at a lot more cost-effective price.
Yeah.
Well, I can't speak to the music per se, but like it's like the democratization of all this gear and equipment that's making it somewhat accessible. Like you might not have the orchestra, but you could get the ballpark sound of like what you're going for. So be like, okay, well, maybe you do want some real players on this song, but but you can just try it out so quickly with some of these new softwares, kind of like with film or with video. The fact that I'm not running film, I have a longer leash or I have more of ability to screw up and edit things out and figure out what's working after the fact, after I've shot hours of footage, instead of being like super select, which, there's a negative side to that for sure. But it certainly opens up the possibilities and exploration of your own creativity.
Well, yeah, I mean, these days you can shoot a movie on your phone and get it released. Some people have, for God's sakes, but
yeah,
it's really a beautiful thing, because it does open up so many different avenues for creativity. And I'm kind of curious, because I love that you use the word democratization, because not only has the gear been democratized, but the content has been democratized. There's so much of it out there now. And I'm kind of curious, when you guys are in the moment and you're working, can you think about sort of the sellability aspect of things, or do you have to sort of stay true to the vision of sort of the project at hand? Because I can imagine, especially for you guys working on music, you may have other stuff cooking that you could apply to different projects, as opposed to just coming in from scratch on something. Like, it's a weird balance to work on.
I think it's all, God, with music, I've seen this in so many different capacities with sync libraries and production houses and things of that nature. But I always go back to this. It's all about the story, right? And if you have the knowledge to tell that story, whether it's through a keyboard or through, your lyrics, etc., that's what translates. It doesn't really matter, especially for something emotional and personal. As long as it's applied in the right context, I think it's all about the storytelling. And to tell the story properly, you have to understand that story in your core. And I think that's what makes a song special to a piece of, film or whatever it may be. And so, yeah, I like, because there are a million versions of a million songs that are great songs, right? That you'll never hear.
Yeah.
So why does that one song become the vehicle that everyone attaches themselves to? And at the end of the day, it's unless it's a gajillion dollars in marketing, it's always the story behind it. It's
Right.
why there are so many great songwriters out there that didn't even have great voices, but they told the best stories.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
No, and I love that you bring it back to storytelling. And I mean, just to put a bow on this, because like filmmaking and music making really at its core are storytelling. And I'm curious for all of you, if you had to pick sort of a creative moment, like, or a piece that you've discovered one time in your life that sort of put you on the road to storytelling, what would it be? Be it a film, a song, a piece of music, anything?
you want to take that first?
I was like wanting to put Mike on the spot first, but
You want to put me on the spot? I can tell you the film that changed my world was 2001: Space Odyssey.
Love it.
How they,
Love
the way they use sound design in that, with the visuals, that is the ultimate story to me. And it was done in such a way where people still think that we never landed on the moon, because it was filmed so well that they were able to fake space that well that there's an entire conspiracy theory kind of surrounding that. So 2001: Space Odyssey is mine. Go ahead, Brian.
I mean, I mean, it's probably an easy pass, but like Empire Strikes Back. I mean, when I was little, like I watched that film probably like 100 times, and I learned how to edit. I had like a VHS player and just double stacked them and edited reel to reel. I was like, I want all the lightsaber fights to be like on one reel, and I just watch them all and just totally geek out in my own like spare time. But like it kind of like taught you to think, at least like when it was that's that way most editing systems were back then when I was growing up, even though I didn't know it was like reel to reel, like linear style, like start, stop, find the next piece of the puzzle and then smash it right up there. And it just makes you appreciate some of the tools later on. But and also like watching a film 100 times, you start to notice things that over and over again.
All right, Dan.
Yeah, that's a tough follow-up. So mine is not visual, it's a song. But I remember vividly when I was like 6 years old, and I can thank my parents for this because this was probably the radio station they were listening to. But I heard Another Day in Paradise by Phil Collins, and that motif at the beginning, I don't know why, but I remember like feeling something different in my body. And I like immediately connected to it. It made me sad. It made me interested. Just a silly 80s synth being used. But that was like the moment where I knew that music triggered differently for me. And really it was, Phil Collins was a great storyteller.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, that was my moment. And it's as vivid as anything I have. So a weird one, but that's it.
Hey, you know what? Mine's actually kind of weird too. I'm a film guy, but I think for me it was Phil Collins in the Air Tonight with the boom, 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 boom.
The drum solo.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we're both drummers, so we can relate there.
It's amazing how many people that song had an impact on for that one part.
One drum fill.
totally.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like I don't think there's a person who doesn't know it. Even with like the millennials and the Gen Zs, they still know it.
Yeah.
Wild.
Epic is epic, man. No matter what the decade, it translates for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, heck yeah.
But you know what? I just want to say thank you again for the time, and thank you for the work here, because this is a film that, like you say, it continues a very important story, an important conversation that needs to be had, but it's still incredibly entertaining as well. And it's a damn good film, and congratulations to all of you on the work, and keep it up, guys.
Thanks so much, David.
Yeah, thanks so
Appreciate
much.
your time.
Yes, thank you for hosting such a great interview. We appreciate
All
it.
right.
Hopefully we do
Thanks,
our part.
guys. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.